feels a little dark for a Saturday morning, sunshine and all, but I'm glad that you're here and you've chosen to take precious time to be here and to work on things related to marriage. I know you don't get very many Saturdays, and so appreciate the fact that you're making this investment. We are going to be talking about this marriage retreat weekend. We can look at as like marriage 2.0 or 3.0. It's like a lot of times you go to marriage retreats and you go over the same information every time, and that is, what does the Bible say is the role of the husband? What does the Bible say is the role of the wife? What is, how do we love one another better? And we're going to try to go a little bit deeper on some of these things and ask questions of why do we do what we do, and how can we understand that better and make a better plan for dealing with the things that are going on below the surface and not just the surface things. For example, if you were to take a survey, if you're going to go online and Google a survey of the top 3 problems in marriage, right? Like you're playing Family Feud, what's the top 3? The survey says, ding, ding, ding. The number one answer almost always is communication. People say communication is the number one problem in marriage. So I ask people all the time, I said, when you were dating, did you have trouble communicating? Nope, usually not, right? When you were, when you didn't have kids, communicating was usually a little bit easier too. But then when you have kids, all of a sudden it's like your capacity gets stretched. It's like, I barely have time to do my job. I barely have time for the kids. I have less time for you. Communication kind of goes out the window. But there's something else. Not only does our time get squeezed, but we all have like this powder keg down inside. And this powder keg is where we keep all of our issues. And there are buttons that go up here, and when our buttons get pushed, the powder keg goes off. And when the powder keg goes off, it's like, whew, I turn into a different person, and all of a sudden, a person who normally could communicate quite well with you loses all ability to communicate, right? Because my buttons have gotten pushed, I've turned into a different person. And what I found is that most of us, our problem isn't that we don't know how to communicate. Right? It's not like we don't know how to listen. It's not like we don't know how to have a decent conversation. It's that we lose the ability to do it because we get so triggered and our emotions get so involved that we literally turn into somebody else, and that person doesn't have the skills. And so that's what I mean by it can be helpful to have some tools for communicating. We're actually going to talk about some of those. But it is even more important to understand, why do I sometimes lose the ability I know I have? So do you know if I did talk to a divorce attorney at one point, not because of our marriage, but because of just curiosity. I said, I do a lot of marriage retreats, and I asked him, I said, well, in your opinion, what is the number one reason people get divorced? And he said, money. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter if it's a lack of money or if it's a lot of money. I said there's people who get divorced over money issues who are rolling in money, and there's people who get divorced over money issues who don't have any money. And I said, why do you think that is, that money is such a crucial divider? And our conversation led to the idea that money is about values. That is, what's important to you, you're willing to spend money on. And so if the husband is willing to spend money on this, but he's not willing to spend money on something that the wife values, the wife feels unvalued, right? Or if the wife's saying, well, I'm willing to go into tremendous debt for this, and the husband's like, oh, no, I would never go into debt for that. Sometimes it's like what you're willing to spend money on, what you're willing to go into debt for, what you're willing, how you're going to use your money. It not only shows values, but it also becomes something of a power struggle of who's going to win here and who's going to get their way. And nothing is more foundational to who's going to, get their way in this relationship than what we do with the money. And so because of that, quarrels over how we use money become huge. But the problem isn't just, we need to have a financial plan. The problem here really is one of the heart, and how do we work with each other on the things that are most important to us. And so that's what I mean by we're going to go below the surface. So this isn't going to be like a financial planning for marriage. There's a place for that. There's some things that are good for that. We want to look at a little bit below the surface here. And so we're going to start with the brain. And this question, why can marriage be so hard? And I I got one. We start with the iceberg principle. And the iceberg principle basically says, as you're familiar probably, up to 90% of an iceberg can be below the water and be below the surface. And so when we go to, again, the top three answers to this question, why marriage is so hard, are communication, money, and the number three is sex. And that is that people are either having a trouble in one of these three areas is what is creating the problem in their marriage. And so it's common at marriage retreats to make those the focus of what we're going to talk about. But I'm believing that underneath there, 90% of our problem is actually below the surface. And if we could deal with what's going on below the surface, these top three things wouldn't be a problem. Because again, let's face it, when we first got married, very few of us were having problems with sex. That's something that developed along the way because of the stuff that was going on below the surface. All right, so let's take a look at the iceberg principle. And sorry, I'm playing with a new toy here. We'll see if I can get it to do what I want it to do. If I can't, go ahead and go to the next slide for me, would you? Thank you. All right, so last night in our leadership setting, we talked about a switch on the brain. So you can kind of picture it this way. If you take your thumb and you put your thumb on the back of your neck, and just picture that this is an on-off switch. And when this switch is on, you get access to three very important parts of your brain. And this was working really well a minute ago. Okay, there we go. Joy, identity, and attachment. Now, when the switch is on, I will tell you this, there is not literally a switch in your brain. This is a metaphor, okay? Just in case somebody was confused about that. But there is something in your brain called relational brain circuits. And these are the circuitry in your brain that are related to relational connection. And these relational brain circuits are found primarily on the right side of your brain. And these relational brain circuits can be on or they can be off. In other words, it's like when the switch goes on, current is released. And when the switch is off, current doesn't go through there. So you can have circuitry in the right side of your brain that is all about your relationships. But if there's no current going through them, it doesn't do anybody any good. So you might have the capacity to be a very relational person, but just because you have the capacity to be a very relational person doesn't mean you're going to be relational in every setting. And that's where most of us run into our problems. It's not that we don't know how to be a good listener. It's not that we don't know how to be relational. It's not that we don't know how to do these things. It's this that a lot of times this switch goes off and I just don't feel like it. And because I don't feel like it, I'm not being my best self around other people. And what I lose then is I lose my desire for attachment and desire for engagement. And I can stop acting like myself, and I can lose my ability to live with joy, because all of these are functions that are found on the right side of the brain. Now, you'll also find that the more tired you are, the harder it is to do this, right? When you're exhausted, it's really hard to feel like wanting to connect with people. Now, sometimes, if you've got a good relationship with somebody and you're tired, nothing is better than having them come snuggle up next to you and just be there. That's a really nice thing. And if I'm not performing, I'm not up, we're not having a conversation, we're not intently looking into each other's eyes and listening, we're just enjoying being together. And that means my relational circuits are on, I'm happy to be connected with you and engaged with you, but we're kind of tired and we're just being together. And that's a nice, wonderful feeling that we have in marriage. And it's good to know that I don't always have to be, giving you my undivided attention and looking you in the eyes and doing something. It's not always about that, but it is about but getting the switch on in such a way that I can be happy to be with you even when I'm tired. Sometimes I've got to communicate to the other person, I am feeling tired. Can we just be quiet together for a while and not deal with anything really too big right now? And that's okay, as long as there's going to be a time we can circle back to it later and deal with those hard things later. So the switch on the brain is important because it's when it's on, I feel like engaging. When it's on, I act like myself. And when it's on, I have the ability to return to joy. And what I mean by joy is this feeling of being happy to be with you. And so, if my wife comes and snuggles in next to me, I'm happy to be with her. We don't have to necessarily do anything else when that's happening. But if I'm sitting here and I'm overwhelmed and exhausted and she says, we really need to talk about our taxes, I'm like, that's probably not going to make me really happy to see her right then. And so I'm like, yes, we do, but let's not do that right now. Let's wait till we have a little more energy. In fact, one of the things that can be helpful with the communication is that if you have to talk about something hard, let's say you got to talk about one of the kids and there's a problem there with one of the kids. Most of us make the mistake of leading with problems when we talk to our husband or our wives about them. And that is, we'll come in and say, have you seen, where our bank account's at? Have you seen, what's going on with our kid? Have you seen this problem? Do you know what's going on here? And we lead with the problem. And whenever there's a problem, it raises the, tension level a certain amount. And so the question here is, if I don't have the emotional capacity or emotional bandwidth to deal with this much stress, then bringing up that problem will have the tendency of shutting off this brain circuit and getting me to turn into a different person. And so what we need to do sometimes, if we're going to have a conversation about something difficult, is you got to do some things to help grow your capacity and grow your emotional capacity. So sometimes before you talk about, the taxes, and before you talk about what we're going to do with the kids, or before you talk about some hard thing that you have to discuss, it's like, why don't we spend a little time together and build some joy with each other? And by building some joy with each other, what that does is it raises our capacity. And now it's like, okay, now I feel like I've got enough energy, enough joy, enough connection with you. We can talk about this hard thing. But too often by diving straight into the hard topic, everyone gets overwhelmed quickly. When you get overwhelmed quickly, first thing that happens is this switch on the back of your neck goes off. When the switch on the back of your neck goes off, I really don't want you around right now. I really don't want to deal with this right now. I turn into a different person, and all I can think of is anger, fear, shame, and, disgust. I have a very hard time finding joy. So it took a while to figure this out. I can remember early in our marriage, it wasn't uncommon for me to get the bank statement, go through the bank statement, and go, Brenda, It's like, we got to talk about this, and it wasn't necessarily that she was doing something wrong, but it's like I would talk about problems when I was upset about the problem, right? And by leading with the problem when I'm upset about the problem, like I'm already at the edge of my capacity, she's walking into it now, and so she's coming in like, how bad is this going to be? And so it's not that we lack the ability to communicate about things like this. It's this, if you're trying to communicate when you're overwhelmed, it's not going to go well. So what you got to do is say, in a sense, is like, it would even be okay for me to go, Brenda, we need to schedule a time to talk about this. Can we talk about this like when would be a good time today for us to talk about what's going on with our bank account and our finances, and give ourselves a little time to prepare for the fact that we're going to have this hard conversation. But too often it's like we just spring these things on people and expect them to respond, joyfully and, anything that I can do to help you feel better, and don't understand what's going on. So this kind of we call that capacity. Having the enough capacity to keep our switch on helps us act like ourselves and live with relational joy. Now, this slide is messed up. And the reason that this slide is messed up is because for some reason when it transferred over, there was supposed to be shading behind these words so that they would just cover up the words behind them. But on your handouts, it doesn't show up at all. So this is what I want you to do. So we have a double whammy here. So on your handout here on page 2, where it says switch, and the switch controls whether or not your relational circuits current is going to your relational circuits. And then when the switch is on, you get access to attachment, identity, and joy centers. And then what you might want to write next to this one here is that attachment is related to a phrase, remain relational. Identity is related to the idea of act like yourself. And then joy is return to joy. Now, we talked about these last night, that mature leaders are leaders who act like adults and handle their business like adults. And I've got a thesis here that most marriages struggle, that the primary reason most marriages struggle is actually immaturity. And that is, if you bring two pretty mature people together, they can usually work through their issues and find a way to get through it and still keep the relationship intact. But the less maturity that I have, the more easily I am overwhelmed and beyond my capacity and turn into somebody I don't want to be. And so we're talking about, well, what does maturity look like? Well, maturity looks like being able to return to joy, act like yourself, and remain relational. And then underneath here is kind of like, so this is return to joy plus act relational plus remain relational equals endure hardship well. So that's kind of where we're going with this. And it would say that on there if I hadn't messed up the slides. Okay, so that's endure hardship well showed up. Okay. In marriage, the ability to handle hard things is a big part of what we do. So if we have to have hard conversations, I need to do some things to feel like we're attached first, like we're bonded first. We have to do some things to make sure that we can both act like ourselves while we have this conversation. And we want to be able to return to joy after we've had the hard conversation. And if we can do that, so like if Bren and I have to talk about, let's say we have a disagreement about what we have a 17-year-old son, right? So we've had to have conversations about things like, what school is he going to go to? Are we going to send him to this school or to that school? Well, that can be a stressful conversation, right? We're going to send him to public school, we're going to send him to private school. If we send him to private school, she's got to go work and do other things. It's like, what are we going to do? That's a heavy conversation. So if we're going to have a heavy conversation about that, we need to first establish engagement. So you do that with eye contact, you do that with touch, you do that with taking a little time to cuddle, and be happy to be together, and establish some joy between us, and then you have the conversation. So that way now we can act like ourselves while we're having this conversation. And even if we have disagreed here, then our goal is we want to return to joy afterwards so that we're still happy to be together, even if we couldn't come to an agreement on that subject. And if you do that, then you're enduring hardship well. Now, most of the time, what would happen in our marriage is we would sit down, and at least on my end, there would be no eye contact, there would be no hand holding, there would be no, none of this engagement stuff, and we would just be the problem. And if she didn't come along with my way of looking at this problem, now she became the problem. And so now I've got two problems. I've got this problem, and I've got her. Right? And there have been times it's the other way around, where it's like now she's got this problem, and she's got me, and I have become a problem. And this is what happens when my relational circuits get shut down and I get past my capacity. People stop being people to relate to and they become problems to be solved. And as soon as your husband or your wife becomes a problem to be solved instead of a person to be related to, your marriage is on a trajectory towards difficulty. Because if she's, as long as she stays a problem to be solved, I'm sitting here thinking, how do I get her to do what I want? And very quickly, as soon as she becomes a problem to be solved, my focus stops being on how do we have the best relationship possible, and my focus becomes how do I win? How do I get what I want in this situation? How do I solve her, the problem she is creating so that I can get what I want so that I can win? Now, how is that a formula for a wonderful, happy marriage? No, right? As long as I'm treating people like problems and my goal is winning, my marriage is going to have some horrendous problems. So largely what we're trying to say with all this is that we have to learn how to keep relationships bigger than problems. And this has been a big journey in our marriage. We still have to work at it, right? One of the things we like, though, is that the brain science here and some of the things that we've been learning have been giving us tracks for understanding why we struggle, and have been giving us some tracks for knowing what to do about it. And so it's not uncommon for us to say things like, let's just keep the relationship bigger than the problem. And that's kind of code for, All right, we got to talk about the problem, but let's make sure that we find a way to make eye contact, find a way to stay connected, and that our relationship doesn't get damaged by dealing with this problem. Does that make sense? All right, how do I keep the relationship bigger than the problem? All right, any questions on any of this so far? Just make sure I give opportunity. Okay. All right. So, when your switch is off, we talked about this briefly last night, so I won't go into. I'm going through this faster this morning because I went through it so much time last night. But when your switch is off, what that means is that you're not getting current going through the relational circuitry on this side of your brain. And when this part of your brain goes off, what that means is you turn into a problem-solving machine. And as a problem-solving machine, your kids become problems to be solved. Your wife and husband, they become problems to be solved. And so the goal is, how do I get my switch back on? How do I get the circuit going through this again? There are three things that we all have to master. One of them is curiosity, one is appreciation, and one is kindness. I'll give you an example here. I was talking to Jim Wilder about this. I learned all of this brain science from him. So I can't say that I am a brain science expert. Jim Wilder is the brain science expert. I just happen to be friends with a brain science expert, right? And so because I've learned all of this stuff, and he's heard me present it. He said, okay, thumbs up, you're doing okay. So but one of the things he said, for example, they've had a lot of tensions in their marriage through the years, and it wasn't uncommon for them to have big fights, just like we've had fights, and I'm guessing you've had fights. And sometimes you can even get to the point where you're thinking to yourself, why did I even marry this person? Right? I would be much less stress in my life if I had just stayed single. And you're going, there have been times, I know in our marriage where I know she's like, maybe I should just move back with my parents for a little while here and get some space. And there's been times like, maybe I'd like her to, because you feel overwhelmed because, you don't know, there's just more going on than you have the capacity to handle. And because things are beyond your capacity, your switch is shut down all the time. You don't feel like yourself. You're not having a lot of appreciation. He said, so it can be very difficult if you have a fight with somebody and they've just thrown out, what, if I'm moving out or I'm getting out of here to try to figure out what it is that you appreciate about this person. Right? Or you just had a fight that at a level that says, I'm not, I don't like you anymore, or there's words passed that aren't very kind. It's very difficult when you're you say, what, I need a little space. You go outside and you think to yourself, what do I appreciate about this person? But unless you can find some appreciation, those circuits are going to stay off. And as long as those circuits stay off, then that other person is just going to remain a problem to be solved. And you are not going to act like yourself, and there's really not going to be any groundwork there for a solution to this. So what Jim said is, in one of those times when he and his wife were having one of these episodes, he was out in the courtyard and he's talking to God. He said, God, you're going to have to help me here because I can't think of anything I appreciate about her. But the Lord reminded him, there was a time in your life, Jim, when you would drive 3 hours just to spend 2 hours with her. What was going on? What did you appreciate then? What was you appreciated about her that would say, hey, she is worth me driving 3 hours so I can have dinner with her and then drive 3 hours home? What was it I appreciated? And I found that one of the more helpful things that you can do in your marriage is actually keeping a journal list of appreciation about the person that you married. And just continue adding to it constantly. It's like, this is what I appreciate most about the person that I married. So that you have a quick reference guide to come back to on a regular basis. Because honestly, when we get triggered and our switch goes off, we forget. It's like, I cannot remember what I appreciate about you. And so it goes downhill quickly. But the more that we can develop that appreciation, the rest of it tends to come. The other thing that happens when I get overwhelmed and when I'm in a situation like this is I lose all curiosity about the other person. Now, the number one reason I lose curiosity about the other person is I think I have them all figured out. You ever do this in your marriage? It's like, Brenda will start talking to me about something, and I'll just tune her out because I've heard this before. I already know where this is going. I already know what she's thinking. I already know how she's feeling. And so in my mind, I'm not even really listening to her. I'm just tolerating her. You ever do that? Okay? So this happens sometimes. I don't know if she ever does this to me or not, but I know I do this to her now and then. And so what you have is, I don't get to do this very often where she's in the front row, too. So this is really nice. But when my circuits are off, I have no curiosity about what the other person is saying to me because I feel like I already know how they feel. In fact, I think I know how they feel better than they do. And I think that I know what they ought to be thinking, which is even more important than what they actually are thinking. And so because I feel like I know what they should be feeling, what they should be thinking, and I've already heard what they feel and what they think, I have no curiosity. And when there's no curiosity, the switch goes off, and I stop being interested in them. And all I am doing now is trying to figure out how to solve this problem that is sitting across from me. And that's why this is so important. I don't want to be just a problem solver. The problem I need to be solving in that setting is, when did my circuits go off? When did the switch go off? And how do I get back to being myself? That's the problem I need to be solving in that situation. How do I get my circuits back on? In other words, how do I find some curiosity? And the way that we do this essentially is you start, if you can tell that your circuits are on by a couple ways. So number one is you like eye contact with the person. You like touching, holding hands, touching. If you can hold hands and make eye contact, it's not a stare down like, okay, first one to look away loses. But it's the idea that we can make eye contact, we can look away, we can make eye contact, but eye contact is the norm and touch is the norm. It's hard to do that, to be holding hands and making eye contact and not have your circuits on. So it's a good thing to practice. In fact, we do this at some of our marriage retreats. We'll have people get in today's, honestly, you're getting the marriage retreat in half the usual time because we usually do all Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning too. So this is a long thing. So I'm leaving out a lot of the exercises we would sometimes do. But I would have you sit where your knees were touching and you're holding hands and you're looking into each other's eyes. And as you do that, and then you look, and when you start feeling like this is becoming uncomfortable, you look away, look down, and then you look back. But you're making the reconnect the norm, right? I look away, and then I reconnect. And I look away, and then I reconnect. And what you're doing is you're and this is what babies do, right? We got a little baby here, right? So what babies do is you ever notice that they'll make eye contact and look at you till they're almost shaking with joy, and then they look away, right? And then like 30 seconds later, they look back at you, right? And they want to see, are you still happy to see me? Is there still joy there? And then it gets up, it's like almost too much, and then they look away. Well, that process actually never changes for as long as you live. And what's happening there is that the part of their brain that is related to joy is actually growing during that experience. So that is growing their capacity to feel and experience joy. And at some point it just gets overwhelmed, like I can't take any more joy. So now I got to look away, calm down. I'm like, okay, it's okay now. And then they come back, it's like, is there still joy there? Oh, there's still joy there, and now I can build some more. And so by building joy and then looking away and building joy and then looking away, this part of my brain grows. Now, the way God has designed us is that from 6 months to 18 months, this part of the brain grows really rapidly with the experience of joy. So it's like babies need like 8 hours a day of joy from 6 months to 18 months of age, where they just need somebody giving them happy faces, and I'm happy to see you, and I'm smiling, and it grows and grows. That happens again around age 4. It happens again around age 13. Now, some of us have a harder time doing it with our 13-year-olds, but yeah, but it happens again where the brain needs a whole lot of joy right then, which is a lot of happy to see you joy. But the good news is your brain has the ability to receive and grow joy for as long as you live. So because your brain has the capacity to receive and grow joy for as long as you live, it is never too late to begin practicing this. So if one of the ways you can tell that you're happy to be with somebody you're engaged in marriage is you're holding hands and you're making eye contact. Now, outside of marriage, that may be awkward. But the other way that you can look at it is, do I have curiosity about this person? And or have I lost my curiosity? If so, the problem becomes not they're a problem. The problem is now, how do I get my curiosity back? And I get my curiosity back by detaching temporarily, thinking to myself about the problem. When I can find some curiosity, then I reconnect, and I usually reconnect eye contact first and then questions. So let me understand. Would you clarify this? Help me understand this. Right? And that's where and so when communication breaks down for people, oftentimes communication is broken down because the curiosity is broken down. All right. Same thing with appreciation. I've got to constantly be coming back to appreciation, and then kindness. Have you ever noticed that sometimes it's really easy to be kind to your husband or your wife? And other times it is like, I have no desire to be kind to my husband or my wife right now. It's like, what changed? You know? And so what we want to get to is the point of saying, I want to act like myself in this relationship no matter what they do. And so since it's like me to be kind, I want to be a kind person, whether they're making me feel kind or not. And that's kind of our goal, right? I want to. Otherwise, what happens is you tend to use kindness as a tool to get what you want. I will be kind to them if it will get me whatever it is, fill in the blank. I'll be kind to them if it'll get them to take me out to dinner later. I'll get kind to them if it'll get them to agree to my way of what we ought to do with this other, this particular situation. And we don't want to use kindness as a tool to get our way in things. We want to use kindness because that's who we are. And it's like us to be kind. And so these are all ways that you can get your relational circuits back on once they have gone off to help the communication process stay functioning. Now, did I leave anything out? All right. She's heard this enough times. Sometimes I know. Yeah, pardon me? Oh, sarcastic curiosity. There is such a thing as sarcastic curiosity, and that does not count. Sarcastic curiosity is like, I'm curious. Are you always this stupid? That didn't. Yeah, that doesn't really count. So, all right. Then last night we also talked about envelope conversations. And an envelope conversation is a particular communication tool that you can use to try to help keep the relationship bigger than the problem. Okay, so if there's a theme to all this, right, the theme is, how do we keep relationship bigger than problems? And we keep relationship bigger than problems by keeping our switch on, our relational circuits operating, right? If our switch goes off, that means the problem has become bigger than the relationship, and now all I can see is the problem. So what we want to do is, how do we keep the relationship bigger than the problem? So the envelope conversation is one way to do this. And this means instead of leading with the problem in my conversation, say, here's the problem, you're creating a problem. Do you know what you're doing? Do you understand the mess you're making? Do you know how you're making me feel? Do you know what's going on? Too many times we lead with the problem in our conversation. And then when you lead with a problem, what is the natural human reaction that you have when somebody leads with a problem to you? What's your natural human reaction? Yeah, counteract it. Our natural reaction is defensiveness. It's like, what? You're accusing me of creating a problem? Well, boom, my first reaction is the walls are going to go up. I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to protect myself from this attack. Oh my, how dare you attack me? and it's natural. In fact, this is principle number 1 in that classic book by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, is that criticism doesn't work. All right, that's his first principle of those things. Criticism doesn't work. And he gives a bunch of examples in that chapter about criminals who everybody knows are criminals. They've murdered people, they've done all kinds of things, who wrote out in some sort of letter, I am misunderstood. Nobody really knows what, the true me and what's going on. He's like, if the worst criminals in the world are saying to themselves, I'm just a misunderstood person, and are not owning what they have done, he says, why do we think anybody else is going to? It's like we don't leading with criticism and saying, here's the problem and it is your fault, please, I need you to change, almost never creates change. All it does is to put us up a wall between you and the person, and they now don't feel safe around you, and they're now waiting for the next attack. So like my wife knows this feeling because she knows what the feeling is, because for a lot of our marriage, I led with problems. I still do when I don't think about it. And when that happens, you can just tell that there's a tightness that comes over your body. Your breathing gets shallow, and you're like, how bad is this going to get? Right? You're not really interested in, what have I done to offend you? What have I done to make this wrong? It's like, I'm being attacked. Well, I wonder how big is this attack going to get? I don't want to be overwhelmed by this. And that's a completely different, it's just a completely different experience. Some of us men, the same way. It's like I remember when Brenda had a certain tone of voice she would use that reminded me of my mom. And when she would use this tone of voice, I would feel like a 5-year-old. And I would react like a 5-year-old, and I would get tense, and what would happen is I wouldn't act like myself. I would turn into a different person. And my circuits would go off, and now she's become a problem, and the only problem here is your tone of voice and the way that you're treating me. And I'm not even interested in talking about what she's talking about. I'm like, you're the problem. And so now, all communication breaks down. And at times like that, it doesn't really help to say, make eye contact and be an active listener and all these nice things. We all know that. The problem isn't that we don't know to do that. The problem is we can't do that because we're so triggered and so past our emotional capacity, we need some help getting back. Now, some of you guys can probably relate to this as well. I'll get back to envelope conversations in a minute. When our circuits get overwhelmed, when my circuits get overwhelmed as a guy, especially one of two things tends to happen, and that is I either blow up or I shut down. It's kind of like too much current coming to an outlet. Too much current comes to that outlet, what's going to happen? It's either going to catch on fire or the circuit breakers are going to shut and it's going to shut down. So what tends to happen when I get more current coming through my relational circuits than I know what to do with, and they're overwhelmed, what most of us as men do is we either blow up in anger, or we just shut down and there's no talking. Right? And that shut down, no talking is to a certain extent an attempt to protect the people from the anger and the blow up that would come out if I didn't. And so a lot of times wives don't understand this, that I have shut down to protect you from what I feel like doing and saying. And so if you don't understand that, and you're like, talk to me, it's like poke, 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 poke. You say, oh, fine, you want me to talk to you? I'll talk to you. And everything's going to come out that I've been trying to keep in, that I was trying to protect you from, and now I'm fine, but you want to hear it? I'll tell you. I think you do this, and you're this, and you're this, and you're always calling this, and causing this, and I'm sick of it, and I'm done with this, and blah, blah. You're like, whoa, that's not the kind of talking I was thinking of. All right, but it's because we've been overwhelmed, and we're past our capacity. We don't know what to do, and when we get way overwhelmed with our capacity, a lot of times when I'm overwhelmed, the last thing I need to do is talk. Because the only thing that's going to come out is bad stuff. And this is why there's this common misconception that talking fixes everything. Well, let's just talk about it. That's actually not the cure for everything. You have to reestablish relational connection before you talk about it, or that talk is going to be disastrous. Right? So reestablishing relational connection first and then talking makes all the difference in the world. So the first time that this was really obvious in our marriage, I remember Brenda was sitting on the bed, I was sitting on a couch in our bedroom, and I don't remember what the issue was anymore, you may, but it was like I had just completely shut down. I mean, there were no talking. And we had just been learning all of this, and she looked over at her husband and going, I have a shut down husband. Now, what do I do with my shut down husband? Normally, she would like, no, we need to talk about this, and I would just get angry. She's like, well, that's not going to work. Let's try something else. And she said, do you mind if I come sit next to you? And when you're shut down and you've lost your capacity, you tend to revert to being very childish behavior, right? Because you have trouble acting like an adult at this point. So in my shut down state, when she said, "Do you mind if I come sit next to you?" I was like, I couldn't even talk, right? It was like, there was no yes, there was no sure, I'd love for you to sit next to me. It was like, if any words were going to come out, I was like, whatever makes you happy, right? It's like, because my relational circuits are not on, I am not happy to be with her. The idea that she wants to come sit next to me is like strange at best. So I'm just like, so she doesn't take offense. She comes and she sits next to me, and she's going, my husband's relational circuits are still not on. And she said, "Do you mind if we hold hands?" And literally, I looked at her and I said, "You're not very good at this fighting stuff, are you?" And I'm like, "Okay, we can hold hands." And it's like, as soon as I did, it's like you could just feel something melt, like, whew. Because I'm ready for a fight. I've got all my years of training have said I'm about to be attacked. Okay, I am sitting there ready. All of my years of training say, I'm about to be attacked, and so I am gearing up for the attack. I am hunkering down to survive this onslaught that I am sure is coming, And then there's no onslaught. Instead, she's like, "Can I sit next to you? Can I hold your hand?" And I'm like, oh, and literally, it's like you can almost hear a pop as the relational circuits come back on. Oh. Now suddenly I'm happy to be with her. I'm feeling like myself. I'm myself again. And now we can have the conversation, and now we can talk. Now, if we had tried to have that conversation 2 minutes ago, it would have been a disaster, right? She would have ended up crying. I would have ended up saying things I regretted. It would not have been a happy scenario at all. But because she was able to help me reestablish relationship and keep the relationship bigger than the problem and get the relational circuits back on, now we could have the conversation about the problem, and we could keep the relationship bigger than the problem. And I can't tell you how many times we've had to do that. And people sometimes say, "Well, that takes so long." I'm like, do you have any idea how long it takes to recover from all the damage that you cause if you don't take the time to do some of these things? Now, I'm also not saying it's all the wife's responsibility to do this, and I'm not saying there aren't times when I need to do this for her. Every once in a while, I can tell there's a big problem, and instead of talking about the problem, I'll be like, "Can I just hold you?" And I've learned that underneath everything, what she really wants is just to know that she's loved. And if she knows that she's loved and that I'm not going to get mad at her and I'm not going to turn her into a problem to be solved, and there's something tangible there that says, let me just love you and let you reassure you that I love you more than this problem. This problem is a minor speck on the mountain of our love, right? This is going to be okay. Then she's going to get her relational circuits back on, and she's going to be able to deal with this stuff better. And so but for a long time I didn't get that, and I just thought, she's hopeless. Why am I, I guess I'm stuck figuring this out by myself. And fine, you go do your thing and I'll take care of it, right? And that's not much of a marriage. That's not the way that we want to do things. And time after time after time, as we go through this, things would go wrong, and and the Holy Spirit would kind of just nudge me afterwards and say, "Marcus, the only thing she really wants is to know that she's loved." And I'm like, "Yeah, but what about the problem?" And he's like, "The only thing she really wants to know is that she's loved." And if you get enough of that, then she's actually pretty good at problem solving too. But you guys got to both get the relational circuits on, and both be functioning that way in order to have this conversation be successful. So one tool, back to envelope conversations, one tool to help you have a conversation about a problem that keeps the relationship bigger than the problem is an envelope conversation. And we say it this way, and that is we got to learn how to take the problems that we're discussing and put them in the envelope of relationship. And what that means is, on either side of the problem, once you stick it in the envelope, on either side of it is relationship. So let's start with relationship. Let's do something to connect relationally before we talk about the problem. Right? So doing something to connect relationally could be eye contact, it could be hand holding, it could be snuggling, it could be taking a walk, it could be, but it's doing something to connect relationally before you talk about the problem. And then when you're done talking about the problem, you reconnect relationally. What are we going to do to reconnect here so that our relationship is okay? And this is whether we solve the problem or not. Because sometimes you can't always solve the problem. But we've at least gotten it on the table. We've at least been talking about it. And so there might come a time saying, you know what, we've at least talking about this. We may have to come back to this problem some more. But for right now, are we okay? Can we keep our relationship bigger than this? Are we going to be all right together? All right, let's do something relational together after this. So you start with relational connection, then you talk about the problem, and you end with relational connection. And that basic pattern can help you keep the relationship bigger than the problem. Too often what we end up doing is it's all about the problem, and if the problem doesn't get resolved, the relationship is kind of on ice until this problem gets addressed. Now, depending on the size of the problem, if somebody comes in and, I just got arrested, or, I'm going to jail, that might be a little bit different, or have been having an affair for 5 years, that might be a little bit bigger kind of problem than the one we're talking about here. But we're just saying for typical things that come up in our marriage that blow us apart, that really don't need to be separating us, this is a process that can be helpful for us to put into practice. So you tell me, what are some examples of things? You think about this. So when I say be relational first, do something relational first, what came to your mind as something relational that you like doing, or that would mean to you, do something relational first? Well, this is what that means to me. What are some things that came to your mind? What's that? Cooking together. Yes, cooking together. Why don't we go cook together in the kitchen and do something we like doing together, and then let's talk about the problem, right? Good. What's something else somebody thought of? Pardon me? Going for a walk. Yeah, let's go for a walk. Looking at pictures. Yeah, of the past. Let's get out a photo album and look at pictures together. It's good. Giving a massage. Yeah. Says, let me rub your feet. Now, is that asking for one or giving one? I mean, it's like, yes. Going out to dinner. Yes, let's go out to dinner, and then let's talk about this later. Yeah. Working out? Yeah. Yeah, let me exercise, work out, get out some of my energy, and then I feel more like myself, and we can talk about this. All right? All those are good answers, right? And the other thing is, notice that no two people had exactly the same thing pop into their head when I said, hey, let's do something relational together. Because honestly, what was popping into my head was, let's sit down on the couch and snuggle. And so you've got all these different things, but the goal here is, how can we do something that bonds us together relationally so that our relational strength has been increased? So if the relational strength between us is here, and I'm going to talk about a problem that's this big, guess what happens to my relationship? It kind of gets crushed by the weight of the problem. So if I can do something to grow my relational connection to here, and the problem is this big, we can handle it. Right? So that's what we're after. We're trying to grow the strength of our relational connection to be big enough to handle talking about this problem with the relationship staying bigger. That's why bringing things into your life as patterns, people who just have patterns of this, where they take walks regularly, they do massages regularly, they cook together regularly, there's a rhythm to these things in life. They just tend to have a little more stability in their marriage because of the rhythms that they have created are growing that relational bond and that relational connection. So when Brenda and I have regular walks together, our marriage relationship tends to benefit from that. Now, I will say, back in the day, got advice saying you should have a date night. Date night, it was almost like date nights will fix your marriage here. But the first 3 date nights we went on, we ended up in fights. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but the reason, our first 3 date nights ended in fights was it was the first time we were alone together, and I kept bringing up problems. So we spent our date night talking about all the problems that needed to get solved because we had so few times when we were actually all alone together. And so instead of the date night actually being about something enjoyable between us, it just turned into problem solving. And if she didn't like the way I was solving the problem, I didn't like the way she was solving the problem, we just ended up going, well, you're a bigger problem than the problem, and getting mad at each other. It's like, well, so much for date nights fixing our marriage. That wasn't the best idea after all. Because, so it helps to understand that even when you're going on a date, you've got to be doing relationship building things on the date and not just doing problem solving things on your date.